Microphone?
You want to do self-introduction?
I don't mind doing that a bit.
You just kick it off. We're ready.
Are you ready to go?
Yeah, probably already filming us.
Oh, we're already filming? Okay. Good morning. Thank you all for coming this morning. Allow me to introduce myself just briefly. My name is Fred Wallman. I've been a friend of Bill Zimmerman for 20 lots of years. It's been a long time. Heather invited me to come in here today to talk a little bit about, well, hold it. Before I start telling you what I'm going to talk about, let me ask all of you what you were told this presentation is all about. Let's find out why you came here and what you want to get out of this thing. So, what do you want to learn? Oh, is that what the postcard says?
What does that really mean?
Okay, all right. Anything else? Is there something specific somebody wants to know? No?
Medical advance directives.
Okay, all right. Anything else? Medicare advance directives. Anything else? All right, well, I'm going to cover all of that, and I've been told when I start getting close to about 10 minutes to when I'm supposed to stop, wave at me. Otherwise, I could go for hours, okay? So I'm just warning you about all of that. Okay, let's see what we got here. Oh, all right. You know, all of you are kind of in a very difficult stage of life right now. And life is just kind of that way. I mean, you know, we're kids, we grow up, we have a good time, we think we're going to live forever. And then we become parents and we have kids and we realize what a struggle our parents had. And, you know, I to an extent, I understand where you all are at. I mean, about 10 years ago, my dad was diagnosed with liver cancer. And, you know, the prognosis on that is usually not very good. And so about 2 weeks later, I got in the car, or I flew back to South Dakota, and you know, I got in late in the evening, and that next morning, Dad goes, he says, "Okay, Fred," he says, "come here, let's go down to my room." Well, Dad has this room at the house, and this is South Dakota, and Dad was a big hunter. So down in that room, he's got the rifles and the shotguns and the loading equipment and all of that stuff. And but there's a little 2-drawer filing cabinet stuffed under the table. And he says, "Open up that bottom drawer." Okay. So I opened up that drawer, and he goes, "Okay. That first folder," he says, "that's got all my pension information. And the one right behind that is the Social Security. And then there's the insurance policy. And here's all the tax information." And he said that last folder right there in the back, he said, "that one's got my obituary." And at that point, I just kind of like, I went, "Yeah, okay." And I got really pretty uncomfortable at that point. But I realized that if it was important to Dad at that particular moment that we go through this stuff, then basically it was time for me to suck it up and just deal with it. So we pulled that out. You know, he went through it with me, pointed out a few things, and it's like, oh, God. And then he said something I'll never, ever forget. And he says, "You know," he says, "I'm a little pissed at your mom because she won't write hers." And, you know, it's just, it was difficult. But again, in their particular case, we were really lucky. He lived another 3 years after that diagnosis, and it was 3 really good years. And we had plenty of opportunity to go through all of those things and kind of get organized. And just to kind of summarize, when Dad passed on, and he had 3 really good years, but when he finally passed away, it took my siblings and I about 36 hours to get stuff squared away for Mom. I mean, it was just that easy because we were that well organized. Mom passed away, it'll be a year ago next week. And again, they were really organized, and it took us about 4 months to distribute the assets, the bank accounts, the IRAs, sell the house, and we were done before the end of the year. So it was really, really easy. And that's the way it should go. You know, that's the way it really should go. Second story in that context I'll share with you is I had a client. She and her husband had come into the office, and they were there with me for their normal financial review, and we were going through their stuff. And at the end of the review, they said, Fred, would it be okay with you to sit down with my mom and kind of go through her stuff? I said, well, of course. Tell me a little bit about your mom's story. And she goes, well, you know, my dad died during World War II. Mom became a war widow. And there was myself and my sister, and it was up in L.A. And she's always handled all of her financial affairs all of her life. You know, she was forced to when Dad died, and she's handled them all ever since. And she's been doing everything. But, you know, Mom's in her 90s now, and she's lived with us for the last year or so, and we kind of think that it's sort of starting to slip a little bit. And would you be willing to look at her stuff and kind of give her some suggestions? I said, sure. So they set a time for Mom to come to the office, and she came in, sweet lady, about this high, and it looked like she'd been getting shorter for the last few years. And they brought in a stack of papers, you know, sort of like this. And we had a nice chat and learned a little bit about Mom and her life and all of that. And I kind of just flipped through the stuff real quick, and I'm seeing, you know, bank account here, another bank account there, CD here, mutual fund there, you know, just odds and ends, lots of stuff, and, you know, here, there, and wherever. And I asked her permission if she'd like me to go through it and kind of organize it for her a little bit. She said, yeah, I'd like you to do that. I said, okay, good. Why don't you come back in about a week? So we established this time to come in for the second one, and while she was out of the office, I went through all of that stuff very, very carefully and found out what she had, what it was worth, where it was at. We organized all of this stuff, and I said, I'm going to make this easy. So I put together a one-page financial statement. Nothing big, nothing complicated, none of that. Made it real simple. And she came in, and we sat. She was sitting right in front of me, and her daughter was at the end of the table, and her son-in-law was at the other end of the table. And I said, well, you know, you've done a remarkable job. You've done very, very well. And she goes, what do you mean? I said, well, here. And I slid the piece of paper across the table so she could take a look at it. And her daughter and her son are just, you know, kind of doing one of these things, but they were polite. They were about 3 feet away, so they were just kind of doing this. And she's looking at this piece of paper, and I just let her stand there, sit there, and kind of look at it. And she's looking at it. And finally, I said, well, here, let me help you out a little bit. So I took a pen, and I just kind of laid it down and pointed to the number at the bottom of the page. And she's looking at it, and her daughter's trying to look a little closer. And I said, congratulations. She goes, and she's looking at it. I said, congratulations, you did it. She said, did what? I said, well, you did it. I said, you're a millionaire. At that point, the daughter got up from the end of the table and went over to look at that piece of paper and looked at her mother and said, for all of these years, I thought we were poor. And her mother looked at her and said, that's why I got $1 million, because you thought we were poor. So anyway, we helped her get everything organized. We consolidated a bunch of stuff. We got her together with an estate planning attorney. They did a revocable trust. And she lived for another 2 or 3 years, and she passed away. And after she passed away, it took the daughter that was local and the daughter that lived in Pennsylvania about 6 months to liquidate everything, convert it to cash. The 2 girls took their money and went their own way. So it can be done relatively simply, relatively easily. But what I want to hit on today is a couple of specifics, some details. And this is stuff that I've gone through on a regular basis. I need to tell you, I'm not an attorney. I'm not an estate planning guy. You're going to need to get some expert help. But today's mission is to really give you an idea of what you can do, you know, yourself, just to get things in order. Now, so that being said, is this the pointer? Aha. So my first thing is make a list and date the list, okay? Make the list and date it. Remember how I told you my dad was so organized? The guy was incredibly organized, okay? But what we realized is after he passed away, he did make a lot of lists, but he never put a date on them. Okay, so put a date on the list. But make a list of everything you've got. How many different accounts are there? How many bank accounts do you have? How many different banks are you doing business with? Is there a bank and a credit union and a CD, and they're all in different places? Well, make a list of that stuff. Mutual funds. Do you have some money with Fidelity, and then some money with Franklin, and then some money with Oppenheimer, and you get a separate statement from each of them every month? How many accounts are there? Okay, here's the big one, okay? Stocks and bonds. If any of you own any stocks and bonds and you've got certificates that are in a safe deposit box, or if any of you worked for the phone company and you went through all of the baby bells and now you got the Verizon and you just found out something about a Frontier that you didn't even know you owned and now they want to liquidate it, and you've got all of that stuff scattered around, you're getting ready to create some problems. Now, a lot of those stocks, you might not have a certificate, but you might be doing business with an outfit called Computer Share. They're a transfer agent. They actually hold your shares for you, okay? But, again, you know, you're dealing with separate entities. So if you've got a bunch of banks, 2 or 3 mutual funds, and a stack of stocks, you're getting ready to create a lot of trouble for your heirs and for your family when it comes to straightening out this stuff. Brokerage accounts. If you've got an account with Fidelity or Schwab or Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, again, how many different places do you have money stashed? Great example is you could take all of those mutual funds, all of those stocks, and put them all in that Schwab or Merrill Lynch brokerage account. You could maintain all those different investments, but instead of having 6 different places with 6 different statements and 6 different places where your heirs have to gather stuff together, you got it in one. And it makes life for everybody a whole lot simpler. So again, how many accounts do you have, and how is title held? That's real important. Is title held in your name only? Is it a joint account with you and your spouse? Is the account in the name of your revocable trust? How is title held? That's very, very important, okay? How is title held? And we're going to get to that here in just a couple of seconds. So again, if you're making a list, list all of the institutions. List every institution where you've got money. Make sure you add the account number. Make sure you list the contact person, you know, the person you deal with. Make sure their phone number is there. All right, help people out. And again, who's the owner? How is title held? And if all possible, consolidate all of that stuff. I'll come back to my friend Mary, you know, the lady with the mystery $1 million. You know, she had, like I said, all of these different stuff, and all of this stuff held directly. And by the time we got done consolidating, we were dealing with one bank. We had all of the investments in one brokerage account. And unfortunately, the annuities we couldn't do anything with. We just had to leave them out there. But again, the idea was you consolidate as much of that stuff as you can and make sure title is held properly. Because again, on occasion at my office, we'll get a referral from a local CPA or whatever where somebody's passed away and we're supposed to help the spouse or the children, you know, sort out stuff. And the last one we had was absolutely the worst in the world. I mean, this guy came in with, you know, 10 different stock certificates that he'd found in Mom's house. And it was like, okay, which of these companies are still in business? Which of these companies have folded? And how many different transfer agents do we have to deal with, you know, to chase down this money? And then you start looking at the registration, and some of the stocks were in Mom and Dad's name jointly. Some of them were, oh, and Dad died, by the way, 20 years ago. But some of it was still in Mom and Dad's name jointly. And then some of it was in mom's name, and some of it was in the name of the trust, and some of it was in the name of her with a previous marriage with a different name. And it was just a disaster. So the point of order is just take a look at all that stuff and ask yourself, how is title held, and consolidate, if you can. And then this comment here, it's a whole lot easier to deal with all of these changes if the person whose name is on the account is still alive. If they're passed on, you just increase the level of paperwork and increase the level of hassle. And what really gets frustrating is when you run into some assets that maybe aren't worth that much money, but it still takes 4 hours worth of paperwork to get it converted, and you start to look at it and you say, it's worth $200. Is it worth 4 hours, to get this together? Well, you don't want to just throw away a couple $100, but it's like, oh, please, this is just too much hassle. If you have annuities, again, the name of the company, the account number, who's the owner, who's the annuitant, and very important, who's the beneficiary? Who does the insurance company know to be the beneficiary? Because is that beneficiary still alive? Are they deceased? And have you changed your mind? Okay? We'll get to beneficiaries in a little bit, and then we'll talk a little bit about taxes in just a couple of minutes. But, okay, I got Jeff and Paul's story here on the side of annuities. Jeff inherited an annuity from his mother, okay? And Jeff's mom had put, $50,000 in this annuity a long time ago. It was worth $250,000 when she died, okay? And Jeff was listed by name as the beneficiary of the annuity, okay? And because he was listed by name, Jeff had the option, because on an annuity, if mom put in 50 and it's worth 200, somebody's going to pay the taxes on that $150,000 worth of profit, okay, if it's an annuity. So mom put in 50, it's worth 200, there's $150,000 worth of profit. And Jeff is still employed, working full-time, has a good living, and it would be really unfortunate to have to pick up taxes on $150,000 all in 1 year. Okay? Not a lot of fun. All right? Government would get a big chunk of it. But because Jeff was listed by name, he had the option of taking the money out of that annuity over his lifetime. So he only had to take out a little bit of money each year and pay a little bit of taxes each year. And after he retired, if he wanted to take out more money and take it out faster, he could. But he had the option because he was listed by name. Now, Paul, on the other side of things, Paul's father was a really very good saver and had a very similar annuity, except Paul's father had listed his estate or his trust as the beneficiary of the annuity. All right? And because the estate or the trust was listed by name, he had to take out all of the money in that annuity over a 5-year period. He didn't have the option to spread it out over his lifetime. It had to be done over a 5-year period. The guy makes $100,000 a year. You add that annuity profit on top of it every year, and that's a lot of taxes. And again, same situation, same annuity contract, same amount of profit, but one guy got to spread it out and pay a lot less tax while he was still working and defer it to later. The other guy didn't have a choice. And God knows we tried. We tried everything we could, but just didn't fly. So the point of the order here is make a list, find out what you got. Yes, ma'am. Oh, that's another thing. If you got questions, ask.
What if something happens to Jeff? Where does that annuity business go?
Good question. Good question. With all of these annuities, once somebody has passed away and the beneficiary inherits the annuity, then they have the option of naming their beneficiary should they not be able to collect all the money. In the same way, exactly. Exactly. So in this case, we named his wife, and then we named the kids as a contingent one in case they're in the same car wreck or something like that. Really good question. And yes, please, ask questions as I'm rolling through here. Otherwise, you're going to forget. So again, list all your stuff, get a list, account numbers, where it's at, how to get a hold of the person that you're used to dealing with, and if all possible, consolidate some of this stuff. I mean, I had a client in a couple weeks ago, and we went through her investments that she's got, and then she asked me about, hey, what do you know about this computer share thing and these Verizon shares? I said, you never told me you had that. She goes, yeah, I just kind of had it for years. It's on a dividend reinvestment program, you know, blah, 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 blah. It's not that much money. And it isn't. I said, yeah, but you just created a lot of hassle for your family. So why don't we just roll those assets into the account you've already got with me? We'll keep them. We won't sell them. I know you like to keep it, and that's fine. But when you pass on, your family has to deal with one account as opposed to me and the guys at ComputerShare. And trust me, it's a lot easier to deal with me than the people at ComputerShare. Okay, so my question is, do you really want to punish your spouse? Or did any of you have kids that were the teenagers from hell? Okay? I mean, did you have kids that were that absolute, you stayed awake at night, you had no idea where they were, you had no idea what they were into? Well, you got some choices. You can kind of organize this stuff and give them a list of what you've got. But if you had teenagers from hell or you really don't get along with your spouse all that well, don't tell them anything. Don't tell them a damn thing. Send them off on a treasure hunt. Make them find the stuff. Okay? And I've seen it happen. I'm not sure if it was done consciously or unconsciously, but you know, there are some options. Oh, retirement accounts. Okay, here's the other fun one. I'm now talking about IRAs, 401ks. For those of you that were teachers, it's like a TSA, now better known as a 403B. If you worked for the county or the state, you might have a 457 plan. If you worked for the federal government, you probably have money in something called TSP. All of those are basically pre-tax money retirement accounts. Same thing. Give your family a list. Where's it at? What's the account number? What's the balance? And how do they get a hold of, you know, the people that you've been working with in the past? Give them a list, and again, same deal. Consolidate if possible. If there's a 403B here and a 457 there and a 401k at your old employer, you can roll all of that stuff into one IRA account. And you can invest it in lots of different stuff if you want to, but the point of the matter is, instead of having 4 different retirement accounts, you got one. Makes life a whole lot simpler. And then, who's your beneficiary? And does the custodian of the account think the same thing that you do? Do they have on record the beneficiary you want to have on record? Okay? And again, you need to check, because a lot of this stuff was probably set up a long time ago. Okay? Yes, sir.
So if I'm on my second marriage
Okay, there you go.
and I pass away,
Yep,
and my first wife is the beneficiary of my life insurance,
yep.
what does my new wife get?
Mad.
She gets nothing, right?
She gets nothing.
That's how important it is.
I got a great story. I've got a dear friend of mine that was a CPA, okay, that advised people on all of these matters, okay? All right? Sharp guy. Known him for years. He dropped dead at his desk about 18 months ago, okay? Just bam, he was gone. And he was a horror story. I was shocked. No will, no trust. He was on his 3rd or 4th wife, and he owned the house. She had no title to the house. It was a disaster. And when they were sorting through stuff, they found an IRA account with about $10,000 in it that I'm sure he forgot about from way back when that had his first wife as the beneficiary. And everybody laughed because they said, oh, Pat is probably spitting in his grave when they found that piece of paper. Okay? But his children, who are adults, and his current wife both kind of looked at each other and said, you know what? We're not going to fight this. Let's just let her have it. It's a whole lot easier than arguing about this thing. But his point was well taken. If you've got a beneficiary that's a former spouse or something, forget it. You know, I had a case a couple years ago. I had an elderly gentleman as a client, and he came on in one, and he was a widow, and he came in one day and brought a lady with him, and he said, "Hi, this is my new wife." I went, "Cool, good for you." And we were chatting and kind of going over some stuff, and she asked me some questions. She had bought a mutual fund statement with her for her IRA account. And she asked me a few questions, and I tried to help her, and we switched it over so I would be the broker of record, so I would get a copy of the statement, so if I needed to call the fund company, they would at least talk to me. And we did all of that. And as we're chatting, I said, "By the way, who's your beneficiary on this?" She goes, "Oh, my daughter." I said, "Okay." I screwed up. I screwed up. I took it at face value for what she told me, that her daughter was the beneficiary. A few years later, she passes away. I get a call from the elderly gentleman that was her husband and said, you know, she's passed away, and I'm sure her daughter's going to get in touch with you about, you know, getting the money out of that IRA account. It wasn't huge. It was, you know, maybe $10,000 or something like that. And so the daughter calls up and she says, you know, yeah, I'd like the money out of the IRA account. I said, fine, no problem. I'll get a hold of the mutual fund company. And I called them up and I said, hi, this lady's deceased and her daughter's the beneficiary, and send us the form so we can get her the money. And they go, well, she's not the only beneficiary. I go, really? And they go, yeah. There's another name on here, and it says son. I went, oh, okay. So I called up this lady, and I said, well, I got good news, and I'm not sure about the rest of it. And I go, the good news is they're sending me the paperwork, so I'll have that, you know, later today. But the other part of it is they say that such and such so-and-so, your brother, is the other beneficiary for the other 50% of the money. She goes, oh, he died. Oh. When did he die? Oh, 10 years ago. Oh. You wouldn't happen to have a copy of his death certificate, would you? And she goes, I think I can find one. Because in the eyes of the IRA custodian, that lady was entitled to half the money. And they needed documented proof that that other 50% person isn't on the planet anymore. Fortunately, she was able to come up with it. So the point is, check that stuff. And now I always ask, is that the only beneficiary? Is there anybody else? Okay, now beneficiaries. If the beneficiary is your spouse, that spouse is able to roll that money over into their own IRA account. It just goes from your IRA to their IRA. And that's usually the way you do it, unless the spouse is under age 60. Then maybe you don't want to do that, and we'll get to that in just a second. If it's a oh, and by the way, if it rolls over into your spouse's IRA, whoa, they can, it's just like their IRA, they can take the money out as fast or as slow, you know, as they really want to. It's their choice. If it's a non-spouse, if your kids are the beneficiary, or a friend or a neighbor or whatever, if it's a non-spouse, they have to open up what we call an inherited IRA or take it all out within that 5-year deal and pay all the taxes on it. If it goes into the inherited IRA, they can spread that money out over their lifetime. Okay, and that's a real important deal. I learned that one a few years ago when my father-in-law passed away, and the stockbroker in Tennessee wanted to send my wife her chunk of the IRA, you know, like this. I said, I don't think so. We don't need that income all in 1 year. You're going to open up 4 inherited IRAs, one for my wife and one for her 3 sisters. That way each sister can do what she wants to, when they want to, but we don't have to make a joint decision. Okay? But that's, again, if they're listed by name. If the trust or your estate is listed as the beneficiary, then we're back to that 5-year rule again. So as a general policy, I encourage people to name people as beneficiaries of IRAs, not the trust or the estate. Now, sometimes that gets complicated if your family dynamics are a little weird. You know, your kids, my kids, our kids, the kid that's the druggie, the kid that's total bum, you know, then sometimes it gets a little more complicated. And then a lot of people name a charity as a beneficiary because, you know, all this conversation about taxes goes away if a charity is the beneficiary because they don't pay taxes. All right? So, oh, and then Roth accounts, Roth IRAs, same situation. Give them a list with the institution, the phone number, you know, who to get a hold of. And again, same thing. Check your beneficiaries. Make sure it's the way you want it. But the beauty of the Roth is nobody pays any taxes ever on that money. Nobody will ever pay taxes on the money that's in that Roth. That's why that's such a good deal. Pensions. Anybody here got a pension? Got a pension? Okay. Pensions could be federal, could be military, county, state, city, school teachers, big into pensions. You're going to want to find out, is there a survivor benefit? Okay? Is there a survivor benefit? What happens to this pension check when you leave the planet? Does the beneficiary get half the money, all the money, 3/4 of the money, or none of the money? Because that sort of is going to be important to the survivors. And again, on the pensions, make sure you've got the ID number. Make sure there's a PIN, because most of these pensions have got a PIN number. If you call in, they're going to want to know what's your PIN. It's not like you got to punch it in, but when you get the service rep on the phone, they're going to want to know what's your PIN. And again, if you don't have that stuff, it's a whole lot easier to get the PIN if you're the one calling, as opposed to your family calling in after you're gone, because they don't want to talk to them. They want to talk to you. So if you can provide all that information on that list, you're in good shape. Social Security. If both spouses, assuming you're married, are at least of full retirement age, meaning 66 or 67, and one spouse dies, the surviving spouse gets the larger of the two Social Security checks. You don't get both of them anymore. The small one drops away and goes away, okay? But the surviving gets the bigger one. If one spouse is significantly younger, like under age 60, there's a widow's benefit they can collect as young as 60. But if they collect under the widow benefit, they're stuck with that amount for life. So a lot of times, if you've got a widow in their 50s, they may want to wait till they're 66 or 67 to turn on their Social Security. That's an individual call. That's a cash flow discussion. And I'm really sorry, there's so many variables on this. And again, family benefit. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Is there a reason why there's 2 ages for full retirement age?
Yeah, in the old days, it used to be when you got to 65, that was full retirement age. But the system was going broke, okay? So they said if you were born 1952, I believe is the date, or earlier, full retirement age is now 66. If you were born like after 1952 or later than 1960, I think is the other date, then it's 67 for full retirement age. Social Security can be a real complicated booger, and if you've got any questions about it, you want to get a hold of somebody that really knows what they're talking about. And sometimes I have found that's not necessarily the Social Security Administration, okay? The people in that office might know what they're talking about, sometimes not so much. So anyway, the point is it is fairly complicated. And again, the last one I was going to bring up here is family benefit. If somebody dies and they have minor children at home that are under age 18, there's a benefit paid out to those kids until they're 18. My secretary, one of the gals that works for me, her son-in-law is being treated for throat cancer, and he's got 3 kids at home. You know, a senior in high school, a sophomore in high school, and an 8th grader. And if he loses his fight with cancer, the older one is going to be 18, and he won't get any benefit, but the younger two will until they're 18. And then, like I said, the surviving spouse could get something as early as 60, but she's really taken a haircut on the benefits she would have gotten until she waited a couple years. Okay? Yes, sir.
My wife is Social Security disability.
Okay.
So, is there any benefit when she passes, or what?
In all probability, you're going to be in business with your own Social Security benefit.
Okay.
Because my recollection of how that works with disability, they will not pay you her disability benefit. You're just in business with your own Social Security benefit. Good question. Okay, what's up next? Oh, life insurance. Same situation. Name of the company, policy number, phone number, and make sure they're good. Because Heather can testify there's been a huge consolidation in the life insurance industry. So the name that's on that policy that's in that bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, it's probably not the same name. Company's probably not the same name anymore at all. Another thing that the insurance companies have started to do is they'll give you an option of naming an alternate family member to be notified if for some reason you forget to make the premium payment and the policy's going to lapse. They've learned that as people's health declines, sometimes they forget to pay their bills. And if it's a life insurance policy, that can be kind of important. You know, we had one a couple of years ago where I knew the people, she had Alzheimer's and he had something else, and all of a sudden we got a notice from the insurance company that they hadn't paid their premium. And it was like, oh, this isn't good. And we called the house and they didn't even remember who we were. And they kept hanging up on us. Fortunately, in the file, we had a phone number for one of their kids. And we called the kids and explained what the deal was, and the kids were in there like right now, going like, oh yeah, we were going through their checkbook and trying to identify stuff that was on auto pay, and if they couldn't identify it, we just canceled the auto pay because they were signing up for stuff that they didn't need or want, so we just canceled this. I went, well, let's get it going again because you might want that life insurance. But again, throw out the old policies. If the policy's not any good, toss it. That way, again, your family's not looking at a bunch of dead documents. Private policies, group stuff, credit card stuff, old serviceman's group life insurance. What do you got? Who's the insured? Who's the owner? Who's the agent? Somewhere I forgot to put beneficiary on that, but that's important. If you have a certain kind of policy called universal life or variable life, and you bought it a bunch of years ago, you're going to want to take a look at it, okay? There's a lot of policies that were sold back in the 80s and 90s and even early 2000s that weren't guaranteed like the old whole life policies. Part of the survival rate of that policy was based on the interest rates that the cash value would earn, in that policy. And those policies were all written back in the days when interest rates were 8, 9, 10%. Today, those policies are paying maybe 3%, and that's high for today's banks, but it's 3% because that's all the insurance companies said they would have to pay at a minimum. But unfortunately, those policies that were supposed to run until somebody was like 100, now some of those old policies are getting ready to lapse when people are in their 70s and 80s because interest rates are so much lower. And it's a real shame if people don't understand that and all of a sudden inadvertently you've got a policy that goes away when you thought you had insurance, for a long time. I had a gentleman I was talking to the other day again. He was a referral from his attorney. And he comes in and he was all hot and bothered. He said, I thought this insurance policy was good for life, and they tell me it's going to run another 4 years. And I explained it to him. He said, well, the sales guy didn't tell me that. I said, well, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. You bought it 20 years ago. And the fact of the matter is, the economics of the world have changed a whole lot, and that policy needs some attention. But again, who's the beneficiary? Is it your spouse? Is it your estate? Is it your trust? Is it your kids? And the beauty of life insurance, here's the real beauty of life insurance. You know who pays income tax on all that money that gets paid out on that life insurance death benefit, you know who pays the taxes? Who pays them? Who pays them? Nobody. Nobody. It's tax-free. Okay? The proceeds of life insurance are income tax-free. Best deal going. Okay, what's up next? Who gets the money? Well, here's a consideration. Now, I'm getting a little maybe down the road from what I was supposed to talk about, but let's do this for a minute. My philosophy on the retirement accounts, the annuities and all of that, you got to look at your whole family, okay? Because if you take out money out of those accounts while you're alive, you pay taxes on it at your tax rate, okay? If your children inherit this money, they're going to pay taxes on those profits at their tax rates. If your grandchildren inherit some of the money, they're going to pay taxes at their tax rates, okay? And sometimes it's worth thinking about all of that. I've seen a lot of cases where this sweet lady, you know, the typical blue-haired, you know, grandma type, that was just adamant, I'm not paying taxes, so she shoved money in annuities right and left. Because in an annuity, everything you earn, you pay no tax on. So she had all kinds of money in annuities. And then she dies. And who inherits the money? Her son, the neurosurgeon. Okay? So he blows it out, pays taxes at his 45% rate, and goes out and buys a new Porsche. If she'd have taken out the money, she'd have probably paid taxes at her 15% rate. So sometimes it makes sense for you to take it out while you're alive and let the kids inherit it, but you pay the taxes at your tax rate. Okay? This is part of what we did last year with my mom. We knew her health was failing. We knew she might not get through 2016. So my brother and I took out a little more out of her IRA than we would normally take, more money than she would have needed for expenses, just because we figured we're in fairly high tax brackets. Maybe we should let Mom pay taxes on some of this money at her tax rate instead of ours. So it's a thought. Here's a quick example. We got money in banks. We got some stocks. We got an IRA worth 50, and a Roth worth 40, a house worth 500,000 that they bought a long time ago. They got an annuity that's worth about 40, but they only paid 10 for it. They got a life insurance policy that's worth 50, and then they got a rental that's worth, you know, like 450, and they only paid about 100 for it. So, you know, they've got a nice-sized estate. But who's the beneficiaries? Well, these people said, grandkids get $50K for college. Grandkids are going to get $50K for college, and we think we're going to name them as the beneficiary of the Roth, you know, because the Roth is worth 40, so that'll go to the grandkids plus another 10 grand. We want to give a charity $50,000. You know, we really like our church. We're going to give them $50K. And then the rest of it's going to get split 50-50 between our son, who's the doctor, and our daughter, who's the elementary school teacher. So that now you got a chance to look at this and say, okay, how are we going to divvy this up? How are we going to divvy this up? Think about it a second. Should the grandkids get the Roth? Should the grandkids get the Roth? Yes? No? Now remember, I said the money that's in a Roth IRA is tax-free. Okay? That's tax-free money. Nobody's going to pay tax. If these guys are college students, they don't pay any taxes in the first place. So do you really want to give them something that's tax-free? Maybe you want to give them something like the IRA up here, which is all taxable, but by the time you split the money between a couple of grandkids, they're not going to pay any taxes on it anyway. Or like the charity here. Should the charity get part of the money that was in the bank account, or should the charity get the life insurance money? Now remember, charities don't pay taxes. And there's no tax on the life insurance policy, So there's no point in giving that to the charity. Maybe you want to give the charity the IRA. Maybe you want to give them the stock that's got the big profit. Let them get rid of it. There's any number of planning opportunities on this. But the most important thing is when you're dealing with this stuff, talk to your advisors. Talk to the lawyer. Talk to the CPA. Talk to the financial guy. Because they're all going to have a different angle on things. The lawyer's going to want to make sure everything goes through the trust because, that's just, in his mind, the ultimate deal. But that can create some tax problems. But you want to get their input. And you also want your executor to know the names and phone numbers of these, the legal, the tax, and the financial people. They should be able to know who does your taxes, who did your trust, all that kind of stuff. Update your beneficiaries. And then again, that comes down to the issue of ex-spouse, deceased family members. Have you changed your mind? Is the beneficiary, hey Z, is the beneficiary your spouse or one of the kids or somebody else like that? Are they listed by name? So again, there's a lot of work to be done on this kind of stuff. You want to simplify it. Who gets the money? Who gets the Roth? Who gets the charity? There's some tax impacts. Oh yeah. Here's another one. Ask yourself, the people that are going to inherit your money, are you doing them a favor or are you going to hurt them? Are you going to hurt them? I've seen a few cases where people inherit some money and they had no capacity to deal with it. And they ended up doing stupid stuff. Not just financial stupid stuff, but unhealthy stupid stuff. So the idea is, are you going to help somebody or are you going to hurt them? Because you got to look at your family dynamics. Are your parents still living by chance? Are your parents still around? Are there spouses, ex-spouses, kids, yours, mine, and ours? How are you going to deal with that? Are your kids all in stable relationships? Are they in a stable marriage situation? Are they financially stable? Are they well off? Or are they still living in your spare bedroom or the room that they grew up in? And then do you have any children who have a spouse that, quite frankly, is a deadbeat? Those are all questions that some people have to deal with. Is there any substance abuse in the family? Addictive behavior, mental health issues, schizophrenia, drugs? And does it involve your kids, their spouses, your grandkids? Who's got the problems? Married beneficiaries, right here. If you're going to leave money to your children and they are married, your children need to understand that they have a choice when they receive that money from your estate. They can put that money in a joint account with their spouse, or they can put it into an account that belongs to them and them only. Okay? And there's a big difference here. Because if that money goes into a joint account, she's nodding back there, when it goes into a joint account with their spouse, that property becomes community property. And if that relationship goes boom, so does your money. It goes boom. Okay? So, how stable is that relationship? Yes, ma'am.
Well, can you direct that money? You can't, can you? Because once the kid gets it, it's theirs.
Yeah, once the kid gets it, it's theirs. Okay? And that's why I always encourage my clients to have a conversation with their children, or if they don't want to broach that subject, send them to me and I'll have that conversation. Because when my wife inherited some money from her family 10 years ago, I got my ego involved. And I was never the favorite son-in-law, okay? They must have seen something in me that my wife didn't. I'm not sure what. But anyway, the point is my ego said, Kathy, that's your money. And so we opened up investment accounts for Kathy, and it was her money. It wasn't our money, it was hers. that did two things. One, it kept my ego intact, and it also said, if we split up someday, I have no claim on those monies because I don't want any claim on those dollars, okay? And that's the way it was for about 10 years. And then about 3 years ago, we were updating our estate documents and just realized that, you know, we've been at this for 37 years. It's probably going to last a little while longer at least. And it was getting to be too much trouble to maintain separate accounts, and we consolidated it all into community property. But that can be an issue. And again, I'm not an attorney. This presentation is not a substitution for legal or accounting advice. You need to talk to experts, and this is one of my favorite. Cheap is sometimes the most expensive. I've seen people, you know, go the discount service route or go the online document route because they were going to save some money. And, you know, sometimes that works. That's fine. But I've also seen cases where it was like, and of course, I'm usually dealing with it after the fact. And it's like, you know, if mom and dad would have gotten some good advice, you know, it would have turned out better. Oh, okay, and I'm going to run through this real quick. If you've got no documents, it's called intestate succession, okay? No documents, no will, no trust, no handwritten note on the back of an envelope in your sock drawer. You just die and you got nothing, okay? You just created hell for your family. Now, if you're still married and the house is joint and all your bank accounts are joint, then it's not too bad. But if it's going to your kids and you die without a document, they're going to go through hell. And they're also going to deal with the state of California and the rules that the state of California has as to what it says and who gets the money. Because you had your chance to say who's going to get the money, and you purposely avoided making that decision. And then the state of California is going to take your assets, take a look at who your family members are, and they're going to divvy it up based on their set of rules. Okay? If you've got a will is just a real simple document that says, hi, I love you, honey, and it all goes to my spouse. And if honey and I are both gone, then, you know, we're going to split it up among our 2 or 3 kids. Boom, 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 boom. And when the dust settles, the kids get their money, and then they start fighting, and then everybody goes down the road. But if you have no documents or you have a will, your estate goes through a fun little process known as probate. Anybody been through probate? Probate in California applies if you own any real estate or have more than $100,000 of assets. Okay, so you could have $10 in the bank and own a house, and it's going to go through probate. Or you can be renting an apartment and have 100 or 110, whatever the dollar amount is in the bank, and it's going to go through probate. And probate is a process of determining what you have and who's going to get it. Okay? In other words, they'll look at your will, or they'll come up with the state of California rules, and they're going to go through it. And the great thing about probate is it only takes 2 years in California. Okay? It's easy. It's only going to take 2 years. It's only going to cost about 3% of the value of your assets. And that's not because the executor gets paid. It's because the state and the courts are going to charge that much money just to deal with you. Okay? No big deal. Yes, sir.
What if it's under 100,000?
Then if it's under 100,000, I think you're dealing with something called a summary probate, which is a lot easier. But don't take my word for it. Talk to an attorney. Okay? And then, of course, the hassle. Because I have to tell you, having gone through it with my mom and dad and my wife with her family and watching clients, it's really hard for the family to go on with their life if they're still dealing with this crap. Okay? It's really hard to move on if you're still dealing with this. So, I mean, the time is a hassle. The cost is just outrageous. But it's the hassle, and it's the difficulty, and it's not a fun process. For many people, something called a revocable living trust is a good idea, okay? What a trust does is the trustor, would be you, that's the person that sets up the trust. You say, and in my case, instead of Fred and Kathy owning the house and Fred and Kathy owning the investment accounts as joint tenants, it's Fred and Kathy Revocable Trust owns the house, and the Fred and Kathy Revocable Trust owns the assets. We're still totally in control. We can do whatever we want to do with the stuff. We can change who our beneficiaries are anytime we want to. Nothing's in stone, nothing's in concrete. Because Kathy and Fred are the trustees. And as the trustees, we're able to make decisions and move stuff around. Okay? We've also named a successor trustee. Now, the successor trustee is the person that takes over if Fred dies. Then Kathy becomes the successor trustee. Or Fred takes over if Kathy dies. And then after that, you want to name at least 2 and preferably 3 successor trustees after the spouse. Because this trust has 2 uses. One, it takes effect after you've deceased and you've stepped off the planet, but it also serves in your incapacity. Again, if you're married and you have a spouse, the spouse is the successor trustee, and they just continue to run the show the way you did together before, you passed away. But let's say there's only one spouse left, and that one spouse becomes incapacitated for medical reasons, they've had a stroke, whatever. Then that successor trustee steps in and runs the show financially because you've selected them to take care of things, okay? And then the executor, in most cases, is the same person that is the successor trustee. So again, a lot of people do this, but the biggest reason they do it is if you have all your assets in a trust, it skips that whole probate thing. It skips that whole probate thing. You remember the story about Mary, the lady before? At the beginning when Mary passed away, she and the 2 daughters, they settled up the estate. It was worth $1 million. They split it all up, and they were done in 6 months. It's just that easy, okay? So, healthcare directives, well, he's gone now. I don't know where he went. Healthcare directive, it's called several different things. It can be called a durable power of attorney for healthcare. It could be an advanced directive. Basically what the document is you're giving your authorization to someone to make medical choices for you should you be in a situation where you cannot verbalize to authorize surgery or whatever. This isn't the one that says pull the plug, don't keep me on life support. This is the one that can authorize surgery. This is the one they probably ask you for every time you went in the hospital. I had a little elective surgery a couple weeks ago, and they were looking for my advanced directive. So now, there's also something here called a durable power of attorney for health care, durable power of attorney. That's for financial stuff. I'm a little dubious about those because every time a client walks in with those, the title company, the escrow, the lawyers, they really have a hard time with those documents. But it's a good idea to have them. But they're sort of hard to deal with because unless it was just written yesterday and signed by you and notarized by you, if it was done a long time ago, they may not deal with that. And then the living will is the whole thing about let's pull the plug and not do the life support. Joint ownership on stuff, that's like joint tenants with rights of survivorship. If you look at your house or your investment accounts and it says JTWOS, that stands for joint tenants with rights of survivorship. Okay? And what that means is if there's 2 people on there as joint tenants and one dies, the other person automatically inherits it. They own it. Okay? And it's very commonly done in real estate and done on investment accounts. But again, if you've got a revocable trust, you probably don't want things in joint tenants. If you've got a will, then you probably want stuff in joint tenants, at least if you're still married. Okay? Be very careful with doing joint tenants with children. I catch people doing that a lot, okay? Because they think they're dodging something. Well, they're actually creating a problem. which is a little bit too complicated to go through today, but the fact of the matter is, you want to probably talk to your lawyer, talk to your accountant, but you probably don't want joint tenants with one of your kids. Spouses, if you've got, if you've determined a trust you don't need and all you want is a will, then joint tenants between spouses is probably a good idea. But I'd think about it before I did it with my kids. Where am I at here? Tenants in common, probably not a good idea because that means I own half and you own half, but you don't inherit my half if I die. My half goes to whatever my trust document says or my will says. And sometimes if you've got like two brothers that are in business together or two sisters that buy a piece of real estate, that might be in tenants in common where, if the two sisters have bought something, or sometimes if it's a case where two siblings inherit a piece of property, that might be tenants in common. Because that way, sister, brother own mom's house together, but if one dies, then this half goes to her spouse or something like that. Okay? But again, talk to your legal advisors. And again, I'm not an attorney. This is not a substitute for legal or you need some experts. Talk to your family. Let them know what your decisions are. Let them know what your priorities are. And always remember, you're in charge. This is your money. You're making your choices. And again, you can divvy this up after the fact when you're gone, either the easy way or the hard way. But again, I guess I'll close with this last one. Try to match up your financial reality with your own narrative. And what I mean by that is we all have a financial narrative that's running in our heads. I'm rich, I'm poor, I'm good with money, I'm bad with money. We've all got a narrative running in our heads. And I have a client, her name is Libby. She and her husband Paul came to me 30 years ago, 20 years ago. I've been doing this, by the way, since 1980. I was 12 when I started, okay? But Paul and Libby, they each had an IRA, not a lot of money in it. They both had life insurance policies. I sold them the policies, okay? That was 20, 25 years ago. Paul really kind of ran their financial show, so I didn't see them very often. And all of a sudden, Libby shows up in my office a couple of years ago, or she called to make an appointment. She came in. Paul died a little bit suddenly. They weren't expecting it. He hadn't been ill, and Paul passed away. And Libby wanted to come in and talk to me about her IRAs and Paul's life insurance and filing the claim and all that. So she came in, and she was pretty sad. I mean, they'd been married for a long time and raised a family, and she was pretty devastated with his loss. And we helped her move Paul's IRA into her IRA, and we filled out the form to get the money from the life insurance company. And I suggested, I said, Libby, it might be a good idea if we actually did a real financial plan for you. She goes, what's that? I said, well, it's where we take we take a list of all of your assets, and we take a look at all, how you spend money. How much do you spend, to live where you live? How much do you travel? What do you want to do? Do you have financial things you want to do with your money, going forward? And it might be helpful to you to know if the money you've got is going to allow you to do everything you'd like to do. And she goes, let me think about it. Let me talk to my kids. So she talked to her kids, and she called me back. She says, yeah, I think that would be a good idea. So she came in, and we had a very long conversation about, well, I'd like to do this, and I'd like to take a vacation every now and then. And, I promised this grandson we'd give him $25,000 for a down payment on a house, but I don't know if I can do any of that because she and Paul were both pension people. They had pensions coming in. But because they both had pensions, there weren't any survivor benefits. So, and see, if you don't have a survivor, you get a bigger amount as long as you're alive. If you have a survivor, you get a lower amount while you're alive. Well, they didn't have a survivor benefit because they wanted the bigger amounts while they were both alive. But when Paul died, his pension went away. And Libby's going, I don't know. I'm losing Paul's pension, and I lost this, and I don't know if we can do what we do. I said, well, let's do this plan and let's see what it looks like. So we took all that information, the money she wanted to spend and what she had to work with and all that, and we pulled it all together in this, this software thing, and she comes in for the meeting for us to go through the financial plan. And she comes in, and it was like she had a school bus out in the parking lot. She pulls in, there's 2 daughters, 1 son-in-law, and a grandson that was about 6'4", and his wife. And they all come trucking into my conference room. And we're sitting there, so we go through this financial plan. We've got it up there on the screen. We go through her goals to make sure this is what you want to do. We go through her money to make sure this is all she's got. Okay, this is the pensions. This is what you're going to get. And we said, okay, Libby, you're, I don't know, she's like 75 or 76, 77. I said, okay, we're going to figure you're going to live to 92. And we're going to figure in this inflation rate and all of this and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And we got to the end, and it showed there was about a 90% probability that Libby was going to have enough money to do everything she wanted to do. And I got to the end, and I explained all that to it, and it was up on the computer screen in the corner of my conference room, and Libby's just kind of sitting there staring at it. And I just kind of said, okay, let's let her look. And she's looking at it. And I just let her sit and look at it. She's looking at it. And finally I said, Libby, do you have any questions? She goes, no. And I'm sitting there. She's still looking at that screen. And finally the daughter that was sitting next to her leaned over and tapped her on the shoulder and goes, see, Mom? We told you were going to have enough money. She'd been feeling poor since Paul died. She was scared to death she wasn't going to have enough money. And her kids kept telling her, you're going to have enough money. But of course, they're the kids. I wiped their noses when they were little. What do they know? And it wasn't until she heard it from us that she all of a sudden had a little bit of comfort. So her narrative was, I'm poor. Her reality was she wasn't flush, she wasn't rich, but she was going to be okay. All right? And the point to that story is not to tell you that everybody's going to be okay, but the point to the story is, if your family's going to be tight, well, then maybe it would be helpful for them to actually know it. But, the whole point of this is to help people put a reality to what they think is going on. So, yes, sir.
Okay, so let's back up 2 years. And I'm Paul.
Okay.
Okay?
Uh-huh.
And I've just left UCSD with
Okay.
a diagnosis of ALS. But I'm standing, talking, I'm doing my activities of daily living at this point. What are my options at that point?
At that point, well, the first thing you do is you do what we talked about today. You make those lists, you look at all those assets, you pull all of that stuff together, and you look at it in the context of saying, okay, how much income's coming in today? How's that going to change when I step off the planet? How's that going to change? And can my family stay in their own world, in their house, right where they're at today, with whatever income comes in after I'm gone? Okay, that's number one. And then it's like, okay, if the income isn't enough to keep them going, what do we have over here for assets, if we have assets, if we have investments? Where's that? How does that play into supplementing? If the pension income or the Social Security is not enough, then how are we going to get money, out of these assets? If the house is free and clear, or it's not free and clear, gee, do I want to sell the house and move? Move in with one of the kids, move to an apartment? Do I want to consider, God, I hesitate to say the word, but a reverse mortgage? They're not as ugly as they were 20 years ago. But again, you have to go into that very carefully with some good counsel and some good advice. But that's, for many families, that's the asset. So you got to look at it and say, what happens, after I'm gone? And then start making those plans and making those decisions, and make sure you're doing it with your family. We talked about here is talk to your family. Get them involved. Get your spouse involved. Get your kids involved. You know, I've seen so many families where mom and dad are so stressed because they've got to leave some money to their kids. I'm so passionate, I need to leave some money to my kids. Well, how much money did your parents leave you? It's not a requirement of stepping off this planet to make sure your kids get a bunch of money. You earned it, it's yours. Okay? And I've seen several cases where the kids just go, you know, Mom, Dad, spend it all. We're okay. We don't need it. And sometimes that takes a lot of pressure off the parents that are feeling that guilt that they're not leaving this giant legacy. Okay? Now, I've seen a few other kids that go on the opposite way too. It's like, you know, they've already spent their inheritance. Yes, ma'am.
Well, maybe one thing Keith was getting at that some of us are facing, and that is the care for the person
Oh, my
with
God.
ALS.
Mm-hmm.
And should you or shouldn't you have long-term care insurance? Is it any better than it used to be? Have you considered the fact that you may need 24/7 help, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
And that's all pretty hard to
That's tough.
predict.
Now-
but I think you need to be aware of it.
Yeah, and his comment was, you were just diagnosed, well, you're too late. You're not going to get long-term care insurance. Now,
What is your recommendation on that? Get it when you're young?
well, that's a tough one because those policies are not inexpensive, but the reality of it is, with people like me, there's about a 75% chance I'm going to need care at some point in time before I get off the planet. So I've got to think about, where's that money going to come from? Do I have enough in investments and stuff like that to pay for that care that you're talking about? Because I know how much that care costs. And the reason I know it is I used to own a company that did home care. And I know what 24-hour care costs. Okay? So that's a really, really tough call. And the issue is 75% of the people on this planet are not going to get off the planet without that care. Now, and it's not cheap. And I have to say, my mom and dad both had policies. Okay? But Dad was at home for 2.5 years after his diagnosis of cancer. And he moved into a facility because Mom couldn't care for him at home. And his policy had a 90-day deductible. And Dad died on day 89. Yes. And he would have been pissed. He would have been really upset, but he was ready to go, and we were glad that he passed when he did. Now, in Mom's case, we tried twice to file for a claim, you know, on her long-term care policy, because she elected to stay in the facility after Dad died. And we filed claims twice. And you know, you got to have 2 out of the 7 activities of daily living to get your claim. And Mom was a tough old German girl. If you asked her, do you need help dressing? No. Do you help feeding yourself? Absolutely not. How about using the toilet? Heck no. Well, if I had to fill out the form, I could get a little creative in those answers, but not my mother. And it wasn't until she had a diagnosis of cognitive impairment that we were finally able to collect money from that long-term care policy. But we collected about $150,000, you know, from that insurance policy before Mom passed. And that's $150,000 more that my brother, sister, and I were able to inherit. Now, I'd never have done the math, because they'd had those policies for 28 years before we got any money from the insurance company. And I don't want to do the math what we paid in premiums. I don't want to do that. But the point of the matter is, that's a very huge issue, and it's such a tough question. And again, when you're doing your planning, when you're looking at your affairs and your assets and all that, it's like, well, if this happens, how are we going to do it? Is it going to come from the asset? And the other part about the long-term care insurance, in most cases, it's going to pay part of your cost. It's not going to pay for all of it. But like I said, we got 150 grand that we would have had to spend out of the other stuff. So, good questions. Anything else?
Any more questions on medical advance directives? Or go ahead.
Mm-hmm. No. That's why I caution people when you're getting ready.
For the webcast, could you repeat the question?
I will. She asked a question about if you're receiving a pension and you're already receiving benefits, can you go back and change it and say, because when you set it up, you said, I want the big amount without the survivor. Can you change it and say, I've changed my mind, I'd like the survivor? No. That's a one-time only decision, and that's why I caution people, school teachers, county, state, federal employees, that's a decision you want to make very, very, very carefully, okay? Now, like in my case, my wife's a school teacher, but she didn't start teaching till she was in her 40s. So she's not got that many years in the system, so her pension's not that big. So, and she's still working, but when she retires in a year or so, we're probably going to take the big one without the survivor benefit, only because she's got a decent chance of outliving me. And plus, because it's not that big a dollar amount anyway, if she goes first, I won't be absolutely destitute without that pension. But yeah, that's a tough one. And you always have to make that decision very, 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 very carefully. Yeah.
If you're involved in a family trust,
Mm-hmm.
and the estate hasn't been settled yet, and one of the members passes away
Mm-hmm.
and didn't have a trust, could that affect the holdings, something?
It depends on what the original document says. You go back to that first document, like it's let's just say it's mom and dad's document, and there's 3 kids that are going to inherit the estate, and mom and dad are done, and you're dealing with the estate here trying to settle it up, but Sister Mary Lou over here, that was one of the 3 beneficiaries, she passes away. It really depends on what this original document said, because it could be that Mary Lou's part of the estate goes to her estate or her family or her children. And if she doesn't have a document, then she's intestate, and they're dealing with the rules of the state of California. But if mom and dad's document said, if she's not around anymore, it goes to her heirs, then that's where it goes. And that's usually the way those are set up, but on occasion it'll say, if Mary Lou's out of the picture, then the remaining 2 get her piece.
So if Mary Lou doesn't have any heirs, then could it go into probate?
I'm not an attorney. I'm not here to practice. I think I don't know. That's a really good question. If you give me an email, I can ask one of my lawyer friends. They'll answer it for free, because I send them enough business, so they'll answer my questions without sending me a bill. But yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Yeah, if she has no heirs, and again, I would go back to the original document, mom and dad's document, and see what it says. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Good one. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Are you referring to only California, or are all the states mainly the same where
They're
wills,
an
trusts?
awful lot alike. Okay, they're an awful lot alike. There's going to be subtleties, in every state. My mom and dad passed away in South Dakota, and my guess is probate in South Dakota wouldn't have taken us 2 years, but I
Right.
didn't know that. And the reason I insisted that mom and dad have a trust is because, like I explained to Dad, I said, I'm in California, my brother and sister are both in Minneapolis. None of us are local, so you're going to go get a trust to make our lives easy.
Right. So with a revocable trust,
Right?
it does not go into probate?
It does not go into
Right.
probate as long as you've got all your assets titled in the name of
Yes.
the trust. I had a lady years ago, mom had a lot of stuff, and there was a T-bill that mom didn't have in the trust. So she had to go through probate for that treasury bill because it wasn't in the trust and it went through probate.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Good one.
So how bad is that to go through probate?
Oh, you missed that part.
Yeah. We covered it? I'm
Yeah, we
sorry.
covered it. 2 years of pure pleasure.
Yeah, gotcha.
You learn to hate your attorney. Nicest guy in the world, you will hate him by the time you're done. And you'll think he's totally incompetent. But it's just nobody should have to do that. But okay. Any other questions? Good. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I just want to mention something that's come up with us. We
Uh-huh.
live in a retirement community. And we moved in thinking, this is great. We're going to be taken care of until we die.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it turns out in a retirement community, they have some rules and regulations that apply to people who are no longer ambulatory.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that we are going to have to move from the cottage that we're in because it has steps.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of have to ask yourself after the fact,
Mm-hmm.
was this a wise move? And I think it's going to work out okay, but when you're going into a retirement facility and you think you're doing everybody a big favor,
Mm-hmm.
you need to be sure that the marketing people know that you have the possibility that your spouse at some point, or that one of you may not be able to
Mm-hmm.
get out of bed, dress themselves, go up and down stairs, and that puts you in a whole different category.
Yeah, you got to kind of look at the rest of your life. We went through that with my wife's parents. You know, when they finally went to a community, it was such that her mother needed skilled care from day one. But her dad went from independent living in his own apartment with a 2-bedroom, kitchen thing to assisted living, ultimately to an Alzheimer's unit. So, you got to kind of look at that with an idea for what your future is going to look like, and unfortunately, you don't know what your future is going to look like. I mean, that's the fun part of life, is you don't know what it's going to give you. And quite frankly, if we knew what it was going to give us, we may not have signed up for it. I don't know. But quite frankly, my attitude has always been is if I knew what was coming, I'd probably find really good ways to make really bad decisions. So the fact that I don't know kind of forces me to be honest with myself and plan for the contingencies. What did they say about George Burns? You remember what George Burns said? If I knew I was going to live this long, I might have taken a little better care of myself. But as my father, God bless him, was often heard to say, you got to be pretty goddamn tough to get old. Because he said, getting old is not for wimps. He says, you got to be pretty tough. So, thanks for letting me do this. This was fun. For me, I enjoyed it at least, and hopefully you got a little bit of information out of it. And if you would like, if you want to give one of these guys an email address, there's a Word document that's got these slides on it. If you'd like us to maybe email you what we went through.
That would be terrific.
Yeah, just give Keith here your email address or something, or give it to Heather, and we'll be happy to email. Yes, ma'am. Of course. We didn't put it on any of the slides. You got your pencil ready? My email is F like Fred, FWOLLMAN.com. No, excuse me, F. Wollman. God, I can't even talk anymore. I'm done. Trying to get to be at, and it's Voya, V like victory, O-Y-A, F-A, as in financial advisor.com.
Thank you.
Sure, and I'll pass it on. And I write a newsletter every couple of months. If you'd like to get that, just send me an email, and we'll add you to the newsletter list. Sure. The email is fwollman at Voya, V-O-Y-A, F-A, like financialadvisor.com. And I'll make sure Keith has it. Actually, duh. We'll do this. I think if I am not, oh, there you go.
Perfect.
Do this the easy. After all of that, let me give you a business card that you can lose.
So a big thank you to Fred
You're welcome.
and
Sure.
to Life Pro Financial Services, again, hosting our support group care services meeting. We really appreciate that. Thank you for arranging our speaker this month, and we do appreciate you very much. And with this, our webcast is over.
Yay.